The air in Salvatore's Italian restaurant always smelled like basil and red wine, even at 10 in the morning. I'd been working the breakfast and lunch shifts for almost 3 years now. Enough time to know which floorboards creaked and which customers tipped well. Enough time to become invisible. "Order up, Sophia." Marco, our line cook, slid 2 plates across the stainless steel counter. I balanced them on my forearm with practiced ease, navigating between the crowded tables. Tuesday mornings were usually quiet, but a convention in town had filled us to capacity. My feet already ached in my scuffed black shoes, and my dark hair was coming loose from its ponytail. But I kept the professional smile plastered on my face. 1 more year of this, and I'd have enough saved for nursing school. 1 more year. "Can I get you anything else?" I asked the elderly couple at table 7, setting down their eggs, Benedict, and home fries. The woman smiled warmly. "No thank you, dear. This looks lovely." I nodded and turned, nearly colliding with Mr. Rossi, the restaurant owner. His perpetually anxious expression was more pronounced today, his balding head shiny with sweat despite the blast of air conditioning. "Everything okay, Mr. Rossi?" I asked. He startled. Yes, of course, Sophia. Just make sure table 12 gets whatever they need, okay? Whatever they need." Table 12. I glanced over. It was in the corner, partially obscured by a decorative wine rack. I hadn't even noticed someone being seated there. Usually, Gina, our hostess, would tell me. "New customers?" I asked. Mr. Rossi wiped his brow with a handkerchief. "Just important customers. Very important." My curiosity piqued. I made my way toward table 12, notepad ready. As I approached, the atmosphere seemed to shift, like the air pressure dropping before a storm. 3 men occupied the round table. 2 sat facing the entrance, both wearing suits despite the summer heat. One was younger, with a neck thick as a tree trunk. The other was older, gray at the temples, with a scar running from his ear to his collar. But it was the third man who drew my eye. His back was to the wall, giving him a view of the entire restaurant. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, tailored to broad shoulders. His dark hair was cropped short on the sides, but longer on top, styled with precision. He wasn't conventionally handsome. His nose had been broken at least once, his jaw too sharp, his cheekbones too severe. But there was something magnetic about him. Power radiated from him like heat from asphalt in August. I approached cautiously, the way you might a sleeping lion. "Good morning, gentlemen. Can I start you with something to drink?" The 2 suited men glanced at their boss. Because that's clearly what he was, waiting for his permission to speak. He lifted his gaze to mine, and I nearly gasped. His eyes were a startling shade of amber, almost gold in the morning light. They assessed me coldly, clinically, like I was a specimen under glass. "Espresso," he said, his voice a low rumble with the barest hint of an Italian accent. "For all of us." I nodded, writing it down unnecessarily. "I'll be right back with that." As I walked away, I could feel his eyes tracking me, leaving a trail of goosebumps along my spine. I'd grown up in this neighborhood. I knew who he must be, even if I'd never seen him before. Luca Moretti. The name was whispered in corners of every business in Little Italy. Some said he was a businessman. Others called him a butcher. Everyone agreed he was dangerous. At the espresso machine, my hands trembled slightly. "Who's at table 12? I whispered to Marco through the service window. Marco's eyes widened, and he made a slashing motion across his throat. "Don't ask. Just serve and get out." "But—" "Sophia," he hissed, "just do your job." I prepared the espressos with care, arranging them on a small tray with sugar cubes and tiny spoons. As I carried them back to the table, the front door of the restaurant burst open. 3 men in black ski masks rushed in, brandishing guns. "Everybody down! Now!" the tallest one shouted. Time seemed to slow. A woman screamed. Dishes clattered to the floor. Customers dropped to their knees, hands raised. The espresso tray suddenly felt impossibly heavy in my hands. The robbers moved quickly, one standing guard at the door while the other 2 circulated through the restaurant, demanding wallets and jewelry. The tallest one approached Mr. Rossi at the register, shoving a duffel bag at him. "Fill it! All the cash now!" I stood frozen, the espresso tray still balanced in my hands. One of the robbers noticed me. "You! On the ground!" He pointed his gun at my chest. Something strange happened to me then. A peculiar calm washed over me, like I was watching the scene from outside my body. I'd been here before, in a way, not in a robbery, but in a crisis. I'd been 17 when my mother had her first stroke. I'd found her on the kitchen floor, her face drooping on one side, her words slurred. Everyone else had panicked, but I'd gone cold and clear, calling the ambulance, reciting her medications, keeping my little brother from seeing the worst of it. Now, I felt that same crystalline focus. I carefully set the espresso tray down on the nearest empty table. "I'm not carrying any money," I said, my voice steady. "Just tips, and not many of those yet today." The robber seemed thrown by my composure. He gestured with his gun. "On the floor with the others." "Okay," I said reasonably. "I'm going to kneel down now." I lowered myself slowly, hands visible. From this position, I could see under tables, the trembling legs of customers, a child clutching his mother's waist. I could also see, from the corner of my eye, that the men at table 12 hadn't moved. The third robber was working his way toward them now, demanding watches and wallets from terrified patrons. When he reached table 12, he pointed his gun at the gray-templed man. Watches, wallets, rings, all of it in the bag. The three men at the table remained perfectly still. The robber grew agitated. "Are you deaf?" I said. "I heard what you said," Moretti interrupted, his voice soft but carrying through the now silent restaurant. "Do you know who I am?" The robber hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. In a blur of motion, the thick-necked man lunged across the table, seizing the robber's wrist and twisting until a sickening crack echoed through the room. The gun clattered to the floor. The other robbers reacted instantly, swinging their weapons toward table 12. What happened next was chaos. Gunshots exploded through the restaurant. People screamed. I pressed myself flat against the floor, covering my head. When I dared to look up, the three robbers lay motionless on the tile floor. The man with the gray temples was pressing a napkin to a bloody graze on his arm. The thick-necked man had produced a gun from somewhere and was checking the bodies. And Moretti was staring directly at me, those amber eyes narrowed with interest. Sirens wailed in the distance. Customers sobbed and huddled under tables. Mr. Rossi looked like he might faint, but Moretti's gaze never left me. The police arrived minutes later, flooding the restaurant with uniforms and questions. Somehow, in the confusion, Moretti and his men slipped away. I gave my statement mechanically, describing what I'd seen without mentioning Table 12's involvement. Something told me that would be unwise. Hours later, after the bodies had been removed and the last detective had gone, Mr. Rossi flipped the sign to closed and locked the door. "Go home, Sophia," he said, looking a decade older than he had that morning. "Take tomorrow off." I nodded numbly, collecting my purse from the employee locker. My phone showed 7 missed calls from my brother, who must have heard about the shooting on the news. Outside, the summer evening was thick with humidity. I walked slowly toward the bus stop, the day's events replaying in my mind like a bad movie. "Miss." The voice came from behind me, making me jump. I turned to find the thick-necked man from table 12, standing beside a sleek black Escalade with tinted windows. "Mr. Moretti would like to speak with you." It wasn't a request. I glanced around, but the street was empty in the gathering dusk. "Why?" I managed to ask. The man didn't answer, just opened the rear door of the SUV. Inside, I could make out Moretti's silhouette, watching me with those predatory eyes. Every instinct screamed for me to run. But where? And to what end? If Luca Moretti wanted to find me, he would. Besides, if he'd wanted to hurt me, he could have done it already. With a deep breath, I stepped forward and slid into the back seat. The interior of the SUV smelled of expensive leather and subtle cologne. Moretti sat opposite me, one ankle resting on the opposite knee, studying me with that same clinical interest from the restaurant. "You have a name," he said. It wasn't a question. Sophia Ricci. A flicker of something, recognition, crossed his face. "Italian?" "On my father's side. He died when I was 12. The Moretti nodded, as if this confirmed something for him. You were calm today. When men with guns threatened you, you didn't panic. I shrugged, uncomfortable under his scrutiny. Panicking doesn't help in emergencies. No, he agreed, it doesn't. But it's the natural response, fight or flight. You did neither. You assessed. I'm a waitress, Mr. Moretti. I assess what people need for a living. His mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile. You know who I am? Again, not a question. Everyone in Little Italy knows who you are. And yet, you said nothing to the police. I met his gaze directly. I don't make a habit of inserting myself into other people's business. Moretti leaned forward slightly. Those men today, they weren't there for the restaurant's cash. They were there for me. A message from a competitor. I wasn't sure how to respond to that. I'm sorry? Don't be. They failed. He studied me for another long moment. I find myself in need of someone with your composure. My sister is getting married next month. The planning has been chaotic. She needs an assistant, someone to help manage the details and keep things running smoothly. My mind raced to keep up with this unexpected turn. You want to hire me? As a wedding planner? As an assistant to the bride, the salary would be considerably more than you make serving espresso. I frowned. Why me? There must be professional wedding planners. I don't trust easily, Miss Ricci, but I trust what I see with my own eyes. Today I saw someone who doesn't break under pressure. That's rare. He reached into his jacket and produced a business card, holding it between two fingers. Call this number tomorrow if you're interested. If not, well, Salvatore's will still be there. I took the card cautiously. It was heavy cream stock with just a phone number embossed in black. Think about it, he said, then nodded to the driver. The SUV pulled smoothly away from the curb, leaving me standing on the sidewalk with his card clutched in my fingers. I didn't sleep that night. I called my brother back, assuring him I was fine, just shaken up. I didn't mention the SUV or Moretti's offer. I paced my small apartment, the business card burning a hole in my pocket. By morning, I'd made my decision. I needed money for nursing school. This job, whatever it entailed, would pay well. And something else. Something I was reluctant to admit even to myself. I was curious. Those amber eyes, that casual display of power, the mystery of why he'd singled me out. It pulled at me like a fishhook under my skin. I dialed the number at precisely 9 a.m. Yes? A woman's crisp voice answered. This is Sophia Ricci. Mr. Moretti spoke to me yesterday about a position. One moment. The line went silent for nearly a minute. Then, a different voice came on. Moretti. Miss Ricci, you've made a decision. Yes, I said, swallowing hard. I'd like to accept your offer. Good. A car will pick you up in 1 hour. Pack enough for a few days. You'll be staying at my sister's estate while you get acquainted with the wedding plans. Before I could ask any questions, he hung up. What had I just agreed to? I rushed around my apartment, throwing clothes into a duffel bag, my mind racing. Was I making a terrible mistake? Probably. But for the first time in years, I felt something other than the dull routine of survival. I felt alive. Precisely 1 hour later, a black Mercedes pulled up outside my apartment building. The driver, a different man from yesterday but with the same vigilant eyes, loaded my bag into the trunk without speaking. As we drove out of the city, I watched the familiar streets of my neighborhood fade in the side mirror. I had no idea what waited for me at the end of this drive, but there was no turning back now. Somehow, in the space of 24 hours, my life had been completely upended by a chance encounter and a robbery, and those amber eyes watching me like I was a puzzle to be solved. The drive out of the city took almost 2 hours, the crowded streets gradually giving way to affluent suburbs, then to expansive countryside dotted with estates hidden behind high walls and security gates. The driver, who hadn't spoken a single word beyond Miss Ricci when he'd picked me up, turned onto a private road that wound through dense woods. When the trees finally parted, I caught my breath. A sprawling Mediterranean-style mansion stood before us, terracotta and cream against the verdant backdrop. Fountains flanked the circular driveway, where the Mercedes came to a smooth stop. "We're here," the driver said, his first complete sentence of the journey. Before he could open my door, it swung wide, and I found myself face to face with a woman who could only be Moretti's sister. She had the same sharp features, the same imperious stance, though her eyes were dark brown rather than amber. She wore white linen pants and a silk blouse, her black hair swept up in an elegant twist. "So you're the waitress," she said, her gaze traveling from my bargain store sundress to my scuffed sandals. Her expression suggested she wasn't impressed. "Sophia Ricci," I offered, extending my hand. She ignored it. "I'm Valentina Moretti, soon to be Valentina Castellano. My brother says you're to be my new assistant." "That's my understanding, yes." Valentina turned and walked toward the house, clearly expecting me to follow. I hurried after her, the driver trailing behind with my duffel bag. "The wedding is in 4 weeks," she said over her shoulder. "Everything is already in motion, but the details are overwhelming." My last assistant quit. Nervous breakdown, apparently. She tossed this information over her shoulder like she was commenting on the weather. The interior of the mansion was even more impressive than the exterior. Soaring ceilings, marble floors, artwork that looked museum-worthy. We passed a room where 3 women were arranging massive bouquets of white lilies. "The florists," Valentina explained. "They're redoing all the arrangements, again." She led me upstairs, down a hallway lined with what appeared to be original oil paintings, and finally stopped at a door near the end. "This will be your room while you're here. I've scheduled meetings with the caterer, the band, and the dressmaker for tomorrow. Tonight, you'll need to review all the existing plans so you're up to speed." She glanced at her watch. "Dinner is at 8. Luca will be there. Don't be late." With that, she turned and left me standing at the doorway, the driver setting my bag just inside before disappearing as silently as he'd arrived. My room was larger than my entire apartment, with a 4-poster bed, sitting area, and French doors that opened onto a private balcony overlooking manicured gardens. A tablet had been left on the desk, its screen displaying a wedding planning app with dozens of categories: floral, catering, music, guest list, security. Of course. When a man like Luca Moretti's sister got married, it wouldn't just be about flower arrangements and seating charts. I showered in the marble bathroom, which had more jets and nozzles than I knew what to do with, and changed into the nicest dress I'd packed, a simple black wrap dress that I usually reserved for job interviews. It felt hopelessly inadequate for dinner in this mansion, but it was the best I had. At precisely 8 o'clock, I made my way downstairs, following the sound of voices to a formal dining room where Valentina sat with an older woman who had to be their mother, the same regal bearing, the same uncompromising gaze. A man I assumed was the fiancé stood by the window, drink in hand. He was handsome in a conventional way, with an easy smile that seemed at odds with the Moretti family intensity. And then there was Luca, standing as I entered, those amber eyes finding me immediately. "Miss Ricci," he said, inclining his head slightly. "I see you've met my sister." "Yes," I managed, my mouth suddenly dry. He wore a different suit today, navy blue, still impeccably tailored. The thick-necked man from the restaurant stood unobtrusively in the corner, watching everything. "This is my mother, Maria Moretti," Luca continued, gesturing to the older woman, who assessed me with cool detachment. "And Antonio Castellano, Valentina's fiancé." Antonio stepped forward, taking my hand with genuine warmth. "A pleasure to meet you, Sophia. Val tells me you're our new savior." Valentina rolled her eyes. "I said no such thing. I said Luca hired her and we have to make it work." I felt my cheeks flush, but before I could respond, a middle-aged man in a suit entered. "Dinner is served, Mr. Moretti." Luca nodded. "Thank you, Vincent." The meal was elaborate. 5 courses of exquisite Italian cuisine served on china so delicate it seemed to glow in the candlelight. The conversation flowed around me, much of it about wedding details and family matters I knew nothing about. I ate quietly, trying to absorb as much as I could. "So, Sophia," Maria Moretti said suddenly, fixing me with her penetrating gaze. "Luca tells me you handled yourself admirably during that unfortunate incident at the restaurant." The table went silent. Even Valentina looked uncomfortable. I just stayed calm," I said. "A rare quality," Maria said. My son seems to think it makes you qualified to help with my daughter's wedding, Mother, Luca said quietly, a warning in his tone. Maria ignored him. What makes you think you can manage a wedding of this complexity? I set down my fork carefully. Mrs. Moretti, I've spent the last 3 years managing the needs of 50 demanding customers at once, remembering complex orders without writing them down, and diffusing situations before they become problems. I'm organized, I'm efficient, and I don't crack under pressure. You're also not from our world, she replied. No, I admitted, I'm not. But sometimes an outside perspective is valuable. A flicker of surprise crossed Maria's face, and for a moment, I thought I'd overstepped. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. We shall see, she said, turning back to her meal. After dinner, Valentina announced she was tired and retired upstairs with Antonio. Maria followed shortly after, leaving me alone with Luca in the grand living room. The thick-necked man, whose name I'd learned during dinner was Franco, remained stationed by the door. Luca poured himself a whiskey from a crystal decanter. You handled my mother well, he said, not looking at me. I wasn't trying to handle her, I replied. I was being honest. He turned then, studying me with those unnervingly perceptive eyes. Most people aren't honest with my family. They're too afraid. Maybe that's part of your problem, I said, then immediately regretted my boldness. To my surprise, Luca laughed. A genuine laugh that transformed his severe features. Perhaps you're right, Miss Ricci. Sophia, please, I said. If I'm going to be living here for the next month, Miss Ricci feels too formal. He nodded, taking a sip of his whiskey. Sophia, then. The way he said my name, rolling the syllables with his slight accent, sent an involuntary shiver down my spine. May I ask you something? I ventured. You may ask. I may not answer. Why me? Really? There must be professional wedding planners with far more experience. Luca set down his glass and approached me, stopping close enough that I could smell his cologne, something woody and expensive. When those men entered the restaurant, did you know they weren't there to rob it? The question caught me off guard. No, I thought they were robbers. But you weren't afraid. I was terrified, I corrected him. I just didn't show it. Exactly. He was close enough now that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. Do you know what business I'm in, Sophia? I swallowed hard. People say different things. I'm sure they do. The truth is, I'm in the business of power, and power attracts enemies. My sister's wedding will be attended by everyone who matters in my world. The security concerns alone, he trailed off. Let's just say, I need someone who can handle unexpected situations with discretion and composure. I'm a waitress, I reminded him. Not a bodyguard. You're more than a waitress, he said, his eyes searching mine. You wouldn't be here if you weren't. Before I could ask what he meant, the thick-necked man, Franco, cleared his throat. Sir, Giovanni is here. Luca straightened, his expression shifting back to its usual impassivity. We'll continue this conversation another time, Sophia. Review the wedding plans tonight. Valentina will keep you busy tomorrow. With that, he was gone, leaving me with more questions than answers, and a strange, fluttering sensation in my chest. The next morning, I woke early and spent an hour reviewing the wedding details on the tablet. The scale was staggering. 300 guests, a custom-built venue on the estate grounds, security protocols that read like something from a presidential inauguration. Valentina knocked on my door at 8, already dressed in a designer pantsuit, hair and makeup flawless. Ready? She asked, not bothering with morning pleasantries. The day was a whirlwind of meetings, the caterer presenting menu options, the band leader discussing musical selections, the security team reviewing protocols. Valentina was demanding and precise, rejecting suggestions that didn't meet her exacting standards. By mid-afternoon, I'd filled pages of notes and somehow managed to soothe the ruffled feathers of vendors who'd borne the brunt of the bride's perfectionism. You're not completely useless, Valentina remarked as we walked back to the house after dismissing the florist. It seemed to be her version of a compliment. Thanks, I replied dryly. Can I ask you something? She raised an eyebrow. If you must. Why did your last assistant really quit? Valentina stopped walking, turning to face me fully. For a moment, I thought she might be angry, but instead she looked tired. "Because this isn't just a wedding," she said quietly. "It's a statement. A declaration. The Moretti family joining with the Castellano family changes things in our world. Not everyone is happy about it." "You mean it's political?" She gave me a look that suggested I was being naive. "Everything is political in my family, Sophia." We resumed walking, and I processed this information. I'd known, of course, that Luca Moretti wasn't just a businessman. The whispers in Little Italy, the armed men who always surrounded him, the way people reacted to his name, it all pointed to something darker. "Are you in love with him?" I asked suddenly. "Antonio, I mean." Valentina looked surprised by the question. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. A genuine smile that softened her sharp features. "Yes," she said simply. "He makes me feel normal." I understood then, perhaps for the first time, something about the burden of the Moretti name. That evening, I was updating the seating chart in my room when a soft knock came at the door. I opened it to find Luca standing there, hands in his pockets. "Take a walk with me," he said. Again, not a question. I followed him through the maze-like hallways of the mansion and out onto a stone terrace that overlooked the estate grounds. The summer evening was warm, fireflies beginning to flicker in the gathering dusk. "Valentina says you've been helpful today," he said as we descended the terrace steps into the garden. "She's particular about what she wants. That makes my job easier." Luca chuckled. "That's a diplomatic way of saying my sister is demanding." I smiled. "I didn't say that." We walked in silence for a moment, following a gravel path through meticulously pruned hedges. "You're not afraid of us," he observed. "Most people are. Should I be?" I asked, glancing up at him. His expression turned serious. "Yes." The blunt honesty of his answer sent a chill through me despite the warm evening. "Then why am I here?" I asked. Luca stopped walking, turning to face me. The setting sun cast long shadows across his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his cheekbones, the intensity of his amber gaze. "Because fear isn't useful to me right now," he said. "I need someone who can think clearly, who sees things as they are, not as they wish them to be." "For a wedding? For what comes after?" Before I could ask what he meant, a shout came from the direction of the house. Franco was running toward us, gun drawn. "Sir, we have a breach." Luca's entire demeanor changed in an instant. He pushed me behind him, reaching inside his jacket to produce a handgun I hadn't realized he was carrying. "Where?" he demanded. "East perimeter. 2 men with rifles." "Get her inside," Luca ordered, nodding toward me. "Now." Franco grabbed my arm, pulling me back toward the house. I caught one last glimpse of Luca, his face set in cold determination as he spoke rapidly into a cell phone, before Franco hustled me through a side door I hadn't noticed before. "What's happening?" I gasped as we hurried through narrow hallways that seemed designed for servants, or, I realized with a chill, security personnel. "Stay quiet," Franco hissed, guiding me up a back staircase and into what appeared to be a secure room, reinforced door, no windows, monitors showing security feeds from around the estate. Valentina was already there, her face pale but composed. Antonio stood beside her, an arm around her shoulders. "What's going on?" I asked again. "Uninvited guests," Valentina said tightly. "It happens sometimes." On one of the monitors, I could see men in tactical gear moving through the woods that bordered the property. On another, Luca and several armed men were taking positions around the house. "Shouldn't we call the police?" I asked. Antonio laughed without humor. "The police don't come here unless they're invited, and they're certainly not invited tonight." I sank into a chair, my legs suddenly weak. This was real. The danger, the violence, it wasn't just rumor or exaggeration. I was witnessing it firsthand. For the next 30 minutes, we watched the security feeds in tense silence. There were brief bursts of gunfire, shouted commands, then finally, an all-clear signal. Franco received a call, listened briefly, then nodded to Valentina. "It's over," he said. "They've been dealt with." I didn't ask what that meant. I didn't want to know. When the door opened, Luca stood there, his suit jacket gone, his white shirt stained with something I tried not to identify. His expression was cold, remote, so different from the man who had walked with me in the garden minutes earlier. "It's handled," he said to Valentina, who nodded calmly, as if this were a routine occurrence. Perhaps for them it was. His eyes found mine, and for a moment I saw something flicker there. Concern? Regret? It was gone before I could identify it. "This is the world you've entered, Sophia," he said quietly. "If you want to leave, now is the time. A car can take you back to the city tonight." I should have said yes. I should have run from this house, these people, this danger. But something held me there. Curiosity, maybe. Or something deeper. Something I wasn't ready to acknowledge. "I signed on to help with a wedding," I said, meeting his gaze steadily. "I don't leave jobs half-finished." A muscle in his jaw twitched, the barest hint of a reaction. "Very well," he said. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be complicated." I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, replaying the events of the evening, questioning my decision to stay. What was I doing here, in this house of danger and secrets? Why had Luca really brought me here? And why, despite everything I'd seen, did I find myself drawn to him like a moth to a flame that would surely burn me? Morning came, and with it, a new routine. Security around the estate had doubled overnight. Men with concealed weapons patrolled the grounds. Meetings about the wedding continued as if nothing had happened, but there was a new tension in the air. Valentina worked me harder than ever, her perfectionism reaching new heights as she channeled her stress into wedding details. I coordinated with vendors, revised seating charts, managed the endless stream of deliveries and decisions, and through it all, I felt Luca's eyes on me, watching, assessing, measuring me against some standard I didn't understand. We didn't speak of the incident in the garden again, but it hung between us, an unspoken acknowledgement that I now knew exactly what kind of man he was. A dangerous man, a powerful man, a man who lived by his own rules in a world most people never saw. A week passed in this strange new normal. I threw myself into the wedding preparations, finding an unexpected satisfaction in bringing order to chaos. Valentina, for all her demands, was beginning to show signs of grudging respect for my efficiency. Even Maria had stopped looking at me like I was something the cat had dragged in. And Luca remained an enigma, sometimes distant and cold, other times surprisingly thoughtful, asking about my background, my aspirations for nursing school, my life before our paths had crossed. In those moments, I could almost forget who he was. Almost. Until the night I discovered why he'd really brought me to the estate. I was in the library, finalizing the wedding program on my laptop, when I heard voices from Luca's study across the hall. The door was slightly ajar, and though I knew I shouldn't, I found myself moving closer, drawn by the intensity of the conversation. "Can't be a coincidence," a man's voice was saying. "First the restaurant, now the estate." "The Ricci girl," another voice said. "Have you confirmed?" "Yes," Luca interrupted, and I froze at the mention of my name. "She's Frank Ricci's daughter, I'm certain of it." Frank Ricci, my father, dead for 15 years, or so I'd been told. "And she doesn't know?" the first voice asked. "No," Luca replied. "She believes he died when she was 12. The room seemed to tilt around me. My father hadn't died. Luca knew something about him. "It's dangerous bringing her here," the second voice warned. "If Donato discovers who she is—" "Donato ordered the hit at Salvatore's," Luca cut in. "He already knows. That's why I brought her here, to protect her. And when she learns the truth, that her father didn't die, but betrayed you and disappeared with millions, that he's the reason your father is dead," I must have made a sound, a gasp, a stifled cry, because suddenly the voices stopped. The door swung open, and Luca stood there, his expression shifting from surprise to resignation when he saw me. "Sophia," he said softly. But I was already running, tears blinding me, my father's name echoing in my ears. Betrayal. Millions. Death, a truth I'd never known, hidden behind the story of a father who died from cancer when I was 12. A father who apparently wasn't dead at all. I ran through the mansion's corridors, tears streaming down my face, my mind struggling to process what I'd just heard. My father was alive? He had betrayed the Morettis? Was that why Luca had really brought me here? Not because of my composure during the robbery, but because of who my father was? I burst into my room, slamming the door behind me. My hands shook as I grabbed my duffel bag from the closet and began shoving clothes into it haphazardly. I needed to leave, to get as far away from this place, from these lies, as possible. A knock came at the door. I ignored it, continuing to pack. "Sophia," Luca's voice, low and insistent, "open the door." "Go away," I called, my voice breaking. "Please, let me explain." "Explain what? That you've been lying to me? That you brought me here under false pretenses? That my father—" My voice caught on a sob. The door opened despite my not unlocking it. Of course. It was his house. He probably had keys to every room. Luca stood in the doorway, his expression grim. Behind him, I could see Franco stationed in the hallway, ever vigilant. "You were never going to tell me, were you?" I accused, wiping angrily at my tears. He stepped into the room, closing the door softly behind him. "Not like this," he admitted. "Not until after the wedding, when it was safer." "Safer?" I laughed bitterly. "Men with guns tried to kill you in my restaurant. More men with guns came to this estate. Nothing about being near you is safe." Luca didn't flinch at my outburst. "Those men weren't just after me, Sophia. They were after you, too. That stopped me cold." "What are you talking about?" He sighed heavily, running a hand through his dark hair. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the armchair near the window. I nodded stiffly, sinking onto the edge of the bed, my half-packed bag beside me. "Your father, Francesco Frank Ricci, was my father's consigliere, his right-hand man, his most trusted advisor, for nearly 20 years, Luca began. I grew up with him always at my father's side. He was like an uncle to me, to Valentina." I shook my head in disbelief. "My father was an insurance salesman. He died of lung cancer when I was 12. "That's what your mother told you, because that's what Frank wanted you to believe," Luca said gently. "The truth is more complicated." "Then uncomplicate it," I demanded. Luca's amber eyes held mine steadily. 15 years ago, my father was ambushed and killed by a rival family, the Donatos. It was a devastating blow to our organization. In the chaos that followed, a significant amount of money disappeared from our accounts. Millions. So did your father. The implications hit me like a physical blow. "You're saying my father stole from you and ran?" "The evidence pointed that way," Luca nodded. I was 22, suddenly thrust into leadership, trying to hold everything together while hunting for my father's killer and the missing money. By the time I realized Frank might have been set up, he was long gone. My mind raced, trying to reconcile this stranger he was describing with the father I remembered. The man who taught me to ride a bike, who made pancakes every Sunday morning, who kissed my forehead every night before bed. If my father disappeared 15 years ago, why come after me now? Why would these Donato people care about me? "Because your father resurfaced," Luca said grimly. 3 months ago, we received intelligence that he was alive, living under a new identity in Argentina. He reached out through an intermediary, claiming he had evidence proving he was innocent, that it was Victor Donato who orchestrated my father's murder and framed Frank for the theft. I struggled to keep up. "So these attacks, Victor Donato is trying to eliminate anyone who might know the truth, anyone who could testify against him. That includes you. But I don't know anything," I protested. "You might without realizing it," Luca said. "Frank may have left something with you, told you something before he died. And even if you don't, Donato isn't the type to leave loose ends." I stared at him, trying to process everything. The robbery at Salvatore's was meant for me, yes. But when you didn't panic, when you handled it with such composure, I realized who you must be. You have your father's eyes, his calm under pressure. I knew then I had to get you somewhere safe before Donato figured out who you were too. "So you didn't hire me because you were impressed with me," I said flatly. "You brought me here to use me as bait." Luca's expression hardened. "I brought you here to protect you." "Yes. I hoped your presence might draw out Donato's men, But every precaution was taken. You were never in real danger. Tell that to the men with rifles on the perimeter. I shot back. A muscle in his jaw twitched. If I wanted to use you as bait, I would have left you at your apartment and waited for Donato's men to come for you. Instead, I brought you to the most secure location I control, surrounded you with my best people. I wanted to argue, but his logic was frustratingly sound. Still, the betrayal cut deep. All this time, you knew who I was and didn't tell me. You let me think this was about a job, about the wedding. The job is real, Luca insisted. Valentina's wedding is happening and she does need help. But yes, I had another motive. I'm not going to apologize for protecting you, Sophia. Protecting me, I echoed, while lying to me. He leaned forward, his expression intensely serious. In my world, information is power, and power can be dangerous. I needed to be certain you weren't involved, that you truly didn't know anything. And are you certain now? I asked bitterly. Yes, he said simply. I believe you're an innocent in all this, and that makes my obligation to protect you even stronger. I looked away, unable to bear the intensity of his gaze. My whole life felt like a lie. The father I'd mourned, the childhood memories I'd cherished, all built on deception. What happened to my father? I asked quietly. Is he really in Argentina? Luca hesitated. We don't know. The intermediary was killed before we could extract more information, but we're still looking. I closed my eyes, trying to imagine my father alive somewhere, living a new life while I grieved for him. The pain was almost physical. I want to see proof, I said finally, of all of this. Pictures of my father with your family, evidence of his work with you. Anything. Luca nodded. I can show you. Tomorrow when you're calmer. I'm calm now, I insisted, though we both knew it wasn't true. My hands still trembled, my chest still ached with each breath. Tomorrow, he repeated firmly. For now you should rest. I glanced at my half-packed bag. And if I still want to leave, that would be unwise, Luca said, his tone suddenly cooler. Donato's men are watching for you. Here, at least, you're protected. So I'm a prisoner, I concluded. Luca stood, his expression unreadable. You're a guest under my protection. There's a difference. Not from where I'm sitting. He moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at me. I know you feel betrayed, Sophia. But ask yourself this. If your father had been honest with you from the beginning, would your life have been better or worse? Sometimes lies are told to protect the people we care about. With that, he left, closing the door softly behind him. I heard the distinctive click of a lock engaging. A guest, not a prisoner. Right. I curled up on the bed, my tears finally overtaking me. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my family, my identity. It was all built on lies. My father hadn't died. He'd abandoned us. And now, 15 years later, his choices had dragged me into a world of violence and danger I'd never asked for. Sleep came eventually, fitful and plagued with dreams of gunfire and amber eyes watching me from shadows. Morning brought a knock at my door, which opened to reveal not Luca, but Valentina, impeccably dressed as always, her expression uncharacteristically gentle. Get dressed, she said. There's something you need to see. I followed her wordlessly through the mansion to a part I hadn't been to before. A wing that seemed older, less renovated. She led me to a study lined with books and dark wood paneling, where Luca waited, standing before a wall of photographs. These were my father's, he said without preamble, gesturing to the pictures. I approached slowly, my eyes scanning the images, and there he was, my father, younger than I remembered him, standing beside a distinguished man who had Luca's same amber eyes. In photo after photo, my father appeared, at a christening, at what looked like Valentina's graduation, at formal events in tuxedos, on fishing trips, always close to the Moretti family patriarch. That's your grandfather, Luca said, pointing to a picture of my father holding a baby. And that's you. I stared at the image, memories stirring. I remembered that day, or thought I did. A family picnic, my father tossing me in the air, but in my memory, it had just been us. My father, mother, and me. Not this gathering of dark-suited men with vigilant eyes. He loved you very much, Valentina said quietly. I remember he was always showing us pictures of you, telling stories about how smart you were, how brave. A lump formed in my throat. If he loved me, why did he leave? Why did he let me think he was dead? To protect you, Luca said. Frank knew too much, had seen too much. When he went into hiding, he made a clean break. New identity, new life. But he left me behind, I said, the hurt raw in my voice. He left you with your mother, away from our world, Luca corrected gently. It was the greatest gift he could give you, a normal life. I traced my finger over my father's face in the photograph, trying to reconcile the man I remembered with this stranger who lived in the shadows of power and violence. And now? I asked, turning to face Luca. What happens to me now that I've been pulled back into your world? His expression was solemn. That depends on what we learn about Donato's plans, about your father's evidence. For now, you stay here, where it's safe. For how long? Until after the wedding, at least, he said. By then, we should have a clearer picture of the situation. I thought about my apartment, my job at Salvatore's, my carefully planned future. All of it seemed very far away now, like someone else's life. And what am I supposed to do in the meantime? Continue pretending to be Valentina's wedding assistant while looking over my shoulder for men with guns? Valentina arched an eyebrow. Who says you're pretending? I actually do need help with this wedding. And you've proven surprisingly capable. Despite everything, I almost smiled at her backhanded compliment. Luca stepped closer, his voice dropping. I know this isn't fair, Sophia. None of it is. But right now, we need to focus on keeping you safe while we find out what happened to your father and what evidence he has against Donato. I studied his face, searching for deception, for manipulation. But all I saw was determination and something else, a gentleness that seemed at odds with the dangerous man I knew him to be. Okay, I said finally. I'll stay. I'll help with the wedding. But no more lies, Luca. I want to know everything, good or bad. He held my gaze steadily. No more lies, he agreed. You have my word. I wasn't sure how much that was worth, the word of a man who lived in a world of violence and deception. But it was all I had to hold on to in the storm my life had become. Days blurred into weeks as the wedding approached. True to his word, Luca kept me informed about their search for my father and the movements of the Donato family. Security around the estate remained tight, but no further incidents occurred, creating an illusion of normalcy that was both comforting and deceptive. I threw myself into wedding preparations, finding unexpected solace in the structured chaos of event planning. Valentina proved to be a demanding but fair taskmaster, her initial coldness gradually warming to something resembling respect. We spent hours together finalizing details, and in those moments, I caught glimpses of the woman beneath the Moretti armor, someone who simply wanted her wedding day to be perfect, who loved her fiancé with a vulnerability that contradicted her hard exterior. You're good at this, she remarked one afternoon as we reviewed the final seating arrangement. Ever consider doing it professionally? I laughed. Wedding planning? No. I've been saving for nursing school. She studied me with a thoughtfulness that reminded me of her brother, helping people in crisis. That fits. I hadn't thought of it that way before, but she was right. Whether serving tables, managing wedding details, or planning for a career in nursing, I was drawn to situations that required calm efficiency in the face of chaos. As for Luca, our relationship had shifted into something I couldn't quite define. He kept his distance most days, busy with whatever business occupied the hours he spent in his study with his lieutenants. But in the evenings, he often sought me out, walking with me through the gardens or sharing quiet conversations in the library. He told me stories about my father, the Frank Ricci I never knew, how he'd been brilliant with numbers, fiercely loyal, quick with a joke, how he'd taught Luca to fish, to shoot, to navigate the complex world they inhabited. With each story, the father I thought I knew merged with this stranger, creating a more complex, more human picture of the man who had disappeared from my life. He used to talk about you constantly, Luca said one evening as we sat on the terrace, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. How proud he was of your grades, Your determination. I traced the rim of my wine glass with my finger. I still don't understand how he could just leave. Let me think he was dead. Luca was quiet for a moment. Sometimes the hardest choice is the right one. He knew that if he stayed in your life, you'd eventually be drawn into our world, like I am now, I pointed out. His amber eyes found mine, unexpectedly vulnerable. Yes, and I'm sorry for that. The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. This dangerous man, this leader who commanded fear and respect in equal measure, apologizing to me with genuine regret. It's not your fault, I said softly. You didn't choose this either. He looked away, his profile sharp against the darkening sky. We all make choices, Sophia. I chose this life, continued what my father built. Your father chose to protect you from it. And now... He trailed off. Now what? I prompted. Luca turned back to me, something shifting in his expression. Now I find myself wishing I could offer you more than danger and deception. My heart stuttered in my chest. What would you offer me, if you could? He reached out slowly, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from my face with surprising gentleness. A choice. Freedom. Things I don't have myself. I leaned into his touch before I could stop myself. Maybe freedom is overrated. His smile was sad. No, it's not. The moment hung between us, charged with possibilities neither of us dared to voice. Then Franco appeared at the doorway, his expression grim. Sir, we have information. Luca's hand fell away, his face immediately composing itself into the mask I'd come to recognize. The leader, not the man. Excuse me, Sophia. I watched him walk away, trying to ignore the ache in my chest. Whatever was growing between us was impossible. Dangerous. I knew that. And yet... The day before the wedding arrived in a flurry of activity. The estate transformed as florists, caterers, and decorators descended, turning the already impressive grounds into something magical. White tents gleamed on the lawn, crystal chandeliers suspended from their peaks. Thousands of lilies and roses filled the air with their heady scent. Security personnel in formal attire mingled discreetly with the workers, their vigilance never wavering. I spent the morning with Valentina in the bridal suite, managing last-minute crises with vendors and keeping her mother's well-intentioned but overwhelming suggestions at bay. By afternoon, everything was as ready as it could be. The rehearsal dinner would begin at 7, the last formal event before tomorrow's ceremony. You should rest, Valentina told me, surprisingly considerate. Tomorrow will be chaos. I returned to my room, intending to take a quick nap before preparing for the evening. But as I entered, I noticed something amiss. The drawer of the bedside table was slightly open, though I was certain I'd closed it that morning. Heart racing, I approached cautiously. Nothing seemed disturbed, but as I pushed the drawer closed, I noticed a small piece of paper that hadn't been there before. Unfolding it with trembling fingers, I found a message written in an unfamiliar hand. Storage room, East Wing, 5 p.m. Come alone if you want to know the truth about your father. I stared at the note, my mind racing. This had to be a trap. Security at the estate was tight, but not impenetrable. The attack weeks ago had proven that. I should tell Luca, show him the note. But what if it wasn't a trap? What if someone here had information about my father that Luca wasn't sharing with me? The clock on the wall showed 4:30. 30 minutes to decide. In the end, curiosity won over caution. I slipped out of my room, navigating the busy hallways where staff were too preoccupied with wedding preparations to notice me. The East Wing was quieter, used mainly for storage, and rarely frequented by the family. The storage room was at the end of a dimly lit corridor. I hesitated at the door, my hand on the knob, every instinct screaming that this was a mistake, but the need to know, about my father, about the truth, pushed me forward. The room was dark, filled with covered furniture and boxes. I fumbled for a light switch but found none. Hello? I called softly, stepping further into the darkness. The door closed behind me with a decisive click. I whirled around to find a figure blocking the exit. A man in his 60s, elegantly dressed, with silver hair and cold, assessing eyes. Miss Ricci, he said, his voice cultured. almost gentle. "Thank you for coming." "Who are you?" I demanded, backing away until I hit a covered table. "Victor Donato." He smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "I believe Luca Moretti has mentioned me." My blood turned to ice. This was the man responsible for the ambush at Salvatore's, for the attack on the estate. The man who wanted me dead. "How did you get in here?" I asked, playing for time, eyes scanning the room for a weapon, an exit, anything. "Money opens many doors, my dear, even in the Moretti fortress." He stepped closer, and I noticed he held something in his hand, a small, aged photograph. "I believe this belongs to you." Despite my fear, I couldn't help looking. The photo showed my father, younger than I remembered him, holding me as a baby, my mother beside him. A normal family portrait, except for the man standing next to my father, his hand on my father's shoulder. "Victor Donato. Your father was like a son to me once," Donato said, his voice almost wistful. "Before Giuseppe Moretti turned him against me." "Luca said you had his father killed," I countered, "that you framed my father for stealing from the family." Donato laughed softly. "Is that what Luca told you? How convenient for him." "What do you mean?" "Giuseppe Moretti was greedy and careless. He was leading the family into ruin with bad decisions and worse investments. Your father saw it happening and tried to intervene. When that failed, he came to me for help." Donato's eyes hardened. "It was Luca who had his own father killed. Ambitious young men rarely want to wait for power." I shook my head, refusing to believe it. "You're lying." "Am I? Then ask yourself why your father fled. Why he took evidence with him, evidence that could destroy the Moretti family, or rather, destroy Luca." My mind raced. Could it be true? Had Luca lied to me again, manipulated me? "If that's true," I said carefully, "why would my father let me stay behind? Why would he let me think he was dead?" A flash of something, annoyance, respect, crossed Donato's face. "A fair question. Frank was always too sentimental. He believed you'd be safer away from all of this, that neither I nor Luca would drag an innocent child into our war. Yet here you are," I pointed out. "Here I am," he agreed. "Because your father is ready to come forward with the truth, and Luca knows it. Why do you think he brought you to his estate? Not to protect you, my dear, to use you as leverage against your father." The door behind Donato suddenly burst open. Franco stood there, gun drawn, with 2 other security men behind him. Donato didn't even flinch. "Right on schedule," he said calmly, checking his watch. "You're slipping, Franco. I've been on the grounds for 20 minutes. Franco's expression remained impassive as he spoke into his radio. "We have him, sir. East Wing storage." Seconds later, Luca appeared, fury radiating from him like heat. His eyes found me first, relief washing over his features before his attention snapped to Donato. "Victor," he said coldly. "Luca," Donato replied, almost cordial. "I was just getting acquainted with Frank's daughter. Lovely girl. She has his eyes, don't you think?" Luca's jaw clenched. "Sophia, come here." I hesitated, caught between the 2 men. Donato's words echoed in my mind. Was Luca using me? Had he killed his own father? "Sophia," Luca repeated, his voice gentler. "Please." I moved slowly toward him, still uncertain. "He's been filling your head with lies," Luca said, his eyes never leaving Donato. "It's what he does." "The truth is such an inconvenient thing," Donato mused. "Tell me, Luca, have you shared with Sophia the real reason her father disappeared? The real reason you've kept her here?" "Take him," Luca ordered Franco, ignoring Donato's question. As Franco moved forward, Donato smiled at me one last time. "Ask him about the evidence, Sophia. Ask him what your father really saw the night Giuseppe died." Franco and his men escorted Donato away. I stood in the doorway, shaking, unable to look at Luca. "Are you hurt?" he asked. I shook my head. "What did he tell you?" I finally turned to face him, searching his expression for the truth. "That you killed your father. That my father has evidence proving it." Luca's face darkened. "And you believe him?" It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "I don't know what to believe anymore." He stepped closer, his voice urgent. Sophia, Victor Donato is a manipulator. He's trying to turn you against me because he knows your father is ready to testify that Donato ordered the hit on my father. Then why didn't you tell me everything from the beginning? Why all the secrets? Because the less you knew, the safer you were. His control slipped, raw emotion breaking through. Because I was trying to protect you. From what? I demanded. From Donato? Or from the truth about what happened to my father? Luca ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. From all of it. From this world. He stopped abruptly. From what? I pressed. His amber eyes locked with mine, intense and vulnerable in a way I'd never seen before. From me, he said quietly. From the fact that I've been falling in love with you since the moment you faced down a gunman without flinching. That I hate myself for dragging you into this life. His confession hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath. Luca, tomorrow, he said, his voice firming with resolve. After the wedding. I'll tell you everything then, show you all the evidence we have. I swear it, but right now, I need to deal with Donato. He turned to go, then paused, looking back at me with an expression that made my heart ache. Stay in your room tonight, please. For me. Then he was gone, leaving me with more questions than answers, and the lingering echo of words I never expected to hear from him. Love. Could that be real? Or was it just another manipulation? As I made my way back to my room, I couldn't shake Donato's words, the doubt he'd planted. But I also couldn't forget the raw honesty in Luca's eyes when he'd spoken of falling in love with me. Tomorrow, he'd said, after the wedding. Tomorrow, I would finally learn the truth. The day of Valentina's wedding dawned bright and clear, the estate transformed overnight into a vision of elegance and luxury, despite the chaos of the previous day. Donato's infiltration, the accusations, Luca's confession. The event proceeded as planned. Security had been doubled, with armed men disguised as waitstaff positioned throughout the grounds. I hadn't seen Luca since our encounter in the storage room. He'd spent the night dealing with Donato, according to Franco, who'd been assigned to guard my door. I'd barely slept, my mind churning with questions, with doubt, with the memory of Luca's words. I've been falling in love with you. Had he meant it? Or was it just another manipulation? Another way to keep me under control until he no longer needed me? The morning passed in a whirlwind as I helped Valentina prepare for her big day. If she knew about Donato's intrusion, she didn't show it, focused entirely on becoming Mrs. Castellano. Her wedding dress was a masterpiece of silk and lace, transforming her sharp beauty into something ethereal. You look stunning, I told her truthfully as I adjusted her veil. She caught my gaze in the mirror, her expression softening. Thank you, Sophia. Not just for this, she gestured to her reflection, but for everything these past weeks. You've made this possible. I smiled, touched by her rare moment of vulnerability. Just doing my job. No. She shook her head. It's more than that. You've brought balance to this house, to Luca. She turned to face me directly. I haven't seen my brother look at anyone the way he looks at you. Not ever. My heart stuttered. Valentina, She waved a hand dismissively, her usual briskness returning. I'm not asking for details. God knows I don't want them. I'm just saying, don't judge him too harshly. The weight he carries, it would crush most men. Before I could respond, Maria entered, elegant in midnight blue, to announce it was time. The ceremony was breathtaking. Hundreds of guests seated beneath a canopy of white flowers, a string quartet playing softly, the warm Italian sunshine bathing everything in golden light. I stood at the back, coordinating last-minute details, my eyes inevitably drawn to Luca, who stood beside Antonio at the altar, resplendent in a black tuxedo. He found me in the crowd, his amber gaze locking with mine across the distance. Even from afar, I could see the weariness in his face, the tension in his shoulders. But when Valentina appeared at the end of the aisle on her uncle's arm, a genuine smile transformed his features, pride evident in every line of his body. The ceremony proceeded without interruption. Valentina and Antonio exchanging vows with quiet sincerity. As they were pronounced husband and wife, applause erupted from the guests. Luca embraced his new brother-in-law warmly, whispering something that made Antonio nod solemnly. The reception followed, a lavish affair beneath crystal-strung tents. I moved through the crowd, ensuring everything ran smoothly, acutely aware of Luca's eyes following me. He was playing his role perfectly, the powerful family head, greeting guests, accepting congratulations, but whenever I glanced his way, his attention was on me. Finally, as evening fell and the dancing began, he approached me, looking even more exhausted up close. "Walk with me?" he asked quietly. I nodded, following him away from the reception to a secluded corner of the garden where a stone bench sat beneath an ancient olive tree. Security personnel maintained a discreet distance, ever present, but giving us privacy. "Donato?" I asked once we were seated. "Being held securely," Luca replied. "His men have been told he's away on business." "It buys us time." "Time for what?" Luca reached into his jacket, removing a small USB drive. "This contains everything. Surveillance footage from the night my father was killed. Financial records showing the money trail to Donato's accounts. Sworn statements from witnesses, including your father's original testimony before he disappeared." I stared at the tiny device, struggling to comprehend its significance. "My father's testimony? He witnessed the hit," Luca said grimly. "He was meeting with my father that night, discussing concerns about Donato's growing influence. They were ambushed as they left the restaurant. My father was killed instantly. Frank escaped with a bullet in his shoulder, but not before seeing Donato's men fleeing the scene." "Then why did he run? Why take the money?" Luca's expression darkened. "He didn't take it. The money was moved by one of Donato's moles in our organization, a man named Salvatore. Your father disappeared because Donato's men came after him next, staging it to look like he'd stolen the money and fled. He knew no one would believe him against the evidence Donato had manufactured. So he let us think he was dead," I whispered, pain lancing through me afresh. "Let me mourn him for 15 years. "To protect you," Luca said gently. "He made a deal with federal authorities, witness protection for you and your mother in exchange for information on other criminal organizations. Not us. Your father refused to testify against the Morettis, but he gave enough on others to earn your safety." "My mother knew?" I felt sick at the thought. "Yes. She had to, for the protection to work. But you were too young, too innocent. They decided it would be safer if you believed the lie." I closed my eyes, absorbing this fresh betrayal. My entire childhood, my mother had known my father was alive somewhere. Had she ever planned to tell me? "Why are you showing me this now?" I asked, opening my eyes to study his face. "Because you deserve the truth," Luca said simply. "And because Donato's appearance yesterday changes everything. He's desperate, making mistakes. That means your father's evidence must be damning, and close to being revealed. You think my father is coming forward?" Luca nodded. "Our intelligence suggests he's been in contact with federal prosecutors, negotiating terms for his testimony against Donato. And where does that leave you? Your family?" I asked, understanding dawning. "If my father testifies about organized crime activities, it's complicated," Luca admitted. "But over the past 15 years, I've been redirecting our family's interests, legitimate businesses, legal investments. We're not who we were when your father knew us." I wasn't naive enough to believe the transformation was complete, but I'd seen enough of Luca to know he wasn't lying. Not about this. "And what about me?" I asked. "Once Donato is dealt with, once my father potentially resurfaces, what happens to me?" Luca took my hand, his touch sending warmth through my veins despite the evening chill. "That depends on you," he said quietly. "On what you want." "What I want," I repeated, searching his face. "What if I don't know anymore?" His thumb traced circles on my palm, the gentle touch at odds with the dangerous man I knew him to be. "When I first saw you at Salvatore's, I recognized something in you, a strength, a composure that reminded me of your father. When I realized who you were, I told myself bringing you here was about protection, about strategy." "And it wasn't?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Not entirely. he admitted. I was drawn to you from that first moment. Your courage, your compassion, your ability to see past the surface to what lies beneath. And the more time we spent together, the harder it became to maintain my distance. What you said yesterday, about falling in love with me, was that true? I held my breath, waiting for his answer. Luca's amber eyes held mine, more vulnerable than I'd ever seen them. Yes, he said simply. God help me, but yes. The confession hung between us, fraught with impossibility. He was who he was, a man of power, of danger, of a world I'd never asked to be part of. And yet, I don't know if I can be part of this life, I told him honestly. The violence, the deception, I would never ask you to be, he said. In fact, I've spent weeks trying to convince myself to let you go once this is over, to give you back your freedom, your chance at a normal life. And if I don't want to go, the words slipped out before I could stop them. Luca's expression shifted, hope warring with restraint. Sophia. A commotion from the reception interrupted us. Raised voices, then Franco running toward us, his expression grim. Sir, we have a situation, he said urgently. Federal agents at the front gate, they have a warrant. Luca stood, immediately shifting back into the leader I'd first met. For whom? Victor Donato, Franco replied, and they know he's here. My eyes widened. How? Your father, Luca said, realization dawning. He must have made his deal. This was the plan all along. Catch Donato at a Moretti event, with witnesses. What do we do? I asked, heart racing. Luca's expression was calm, decisive. We cooperate. Donato is in the East Wing holding room. He came here uninvited. Threatened you. All true. And the rest? I gestured to the USB drive. Evidence that helps the prosecution's case against Donato, Luca said, which makes us cooperative witnesses, not targets. He was already 2 steps ahead, seeing the angles, the opportunities in this crisis. It was fascinating to watch, even as my own world tilted on its axis. The next hours passed in a blur. Federal agents swarmed the estate, Valentina's wedding reception continuing with remarkable normality despite the drama unfolding behind the scenes. Donato was taken into custody, his expression murderous as he was led past us in handcuffs. Luca spoke with the lead agent for nearly an hour while I waited anxiously in the library. When he finally returned, his expression was inscrutable. It's done, he said. They have Donato. They have the evidence. Your father's testimony will put him away for life. My father, I echoed. Is he? Here, a voice said from the doorway. I turned, and the world stopped. A man stood there, older, grayer than I remembered, lines etched deeply around his eyes and mouth, but unmistakably my father, Frank Ricci, alive. Sophia, he said, his voice breaking on my name. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. A lifetime of grief and confusion and anger crashing over me in waves. I'll give you privacy, Luca said quietly, moving toward the door. My father stopped him with a hand on his arm. Thank you, he said with feeling, for protecting her, for everything. Luca nodded once, his eyes finding mine one last time before he left us alone. You're alive, I finally managed, the words inadequate for the storm inside me. I am, my father said, taking a tentative step forward. And I know I don't deserve your forgiveness or even your time, but if you'll listen... 15 years, I interrupted, tears finally spilling over. 15 years I thought you were dead. I mourned you. I cried for you. He nodded, his own eyes wet. It was the hardest choice I ever made, leaving you. But I thought it would keep you safe, give you a normal life away from all this. He gestured around us, encompassing the mansion, the world of power and danger it represented. Did it? I asked bitterly. Look where I am now. I never thought Donato would come for you after so long, he said, anguish clear in his voice. When I heard what happened at Salvatore's, that you were with Luca, I knew I had to come forward, finish this once and for all. There was so much to say, so much to ask, that I didn't know where to begin. This stranger with my father's eyes, who had chosen to leave me. How could I ever understand his choices? "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said softly. "I just want you to know that not a day passed when I didn't think of you, miss you, regret what I had to do." I stared at him, this ghost made flesh, and felt the anger that had flared so hot begin to cool, leaving a complicated ache in its place. "I don't know what to feel," I admitted. "That's fair," he nodded. "Maybe, in time, maybe," I agreed, not ready to promise more. "What happens now?" "Donato goes to prison," my father said. "I testify, then return to witness protection. A new identity, a new location." "And me?" He smiled sadly. "You're free, Sophia. Free to return to your life, to nursing school, to whatever future you choose." His eyes flickered toward the door where Luca had exited. Any future. I followed his gaze, understanding what he was saying. "You'd accept that? Me and Luca? The Luca Moretti I've been watching these past 15 years isn't his father," my father said carefully. "He's made different choices, better ones. And the way he looks at you," he shook his head, smiling slightly. "I recognize that look. It's how I looked at your mother once." Something softened in my chest at that. A memory of my parents in happier times. The love that had been real despite everything that came after. "I need time," I told him. "To process all of this, to decide what I want." "Of course," he nodded. "I'll be in federal custody until the preliminary hearing. After that..." He hesitated. "If you wanted to talk again, it could be arranged. Safely." I nodded, not ready to commit, but not willing to close the door entirely. "I'll think about it." After my father left with his federal escorts, I stood alone in the library for a long time, trying to make sense of everything. My father alive. Donato arrested. The truth finally revealed. And Luca, always Luca, at the center of the storm. I found him on the terrace, watching the last of the wedding guests depart. His shoulders were tense, his expression distant as he stared out over the estate grounds. "Hey," I said softly, coming to stand beside him. He turned, something vulnerable crossing his features before he mastered it. "Your father?" "Gone with the federal agents, for now." I leaned against the stone balustrade, our shoulders almost touching. He said I was free to choose my future. Any future. Luca's eyes searched mine, hope and caution warring in their amber depths. "And what future do you want, Sophia Ricci?" I thought about the past weeks, the danger, yes, but also the exhilaration. The purpose I'd found here. The connection I couldn't deny, couldn't walk away from despite every logical reason to do so. "I want to finish nursing school," I said slowly. "I want to help people in crisis. That hasn't changed." His expression fell slightly, though he tried to hide it. "Of course. You should..." "But I also want this," I interrupted, reaching for his hand. "You. Us. Whatever complicated, impossible thing is growing between us." Luca's fingers tightened around mine. "It won't be easy," he warned. "My world is changing," I finished for him. "Just like mine. Maybe we can figure it out together." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking through clouds. Transformative, radiant with possibility. He drew me closer, one hand cradling my face with exquisite gentleness. "Together," he echoed, before his lips found mine in a kiss that felt like coming home, and setting out on an adventure all at once. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be simple. My father's resurrection, my mother's deception, the complicated world Luca inhabited, none of these challenges would disappear overnight. But as his arms encircled me, as the future opened before us with all its uncertainty and promise, I felt something I hadn't experienced since that moment in the restaurant when I'd faced down a gunman without flinching. Calm, clarity, the absolute certainty that whatever came next, I could handle it, and I wouldn't be handling it alone. Epilogue. 6 months later, the small seaside town was nothing like the Moretti estate or my old apartment in Little Italy. The cottage Luca had bought overlooked the Atlantic, waves crashing against the rocky shore below our bedroom window. "Morning, beautiful," he murmured. pressing a kiss to my bare shoulder as sunlight streamed through the gauzy curtains. I smiled, turning to face him. Morning. In the months since Valentina's wedding, we'd found a rhythm, him managing his businesses, the legitimate ones growing, the others gradually diminishing, me starting nursing classes at the nearby university. On weekends, we escaped here, to this private sanctuary where we could just be Luca and Sofia, not a Moretti and a Ricci. My father's testimony had sent Donato to prison for life. We spoke occasionally now, awkward conversations slowly rebuilding a connection I'd thought lost forever. My mother had apologized tearfully for her deception, though the trust between us remained fragile, a work in progress. "What time is your class?" Luca asked, trailing his fingers down my arm. "Not until noon," I replied, leaning into his touch. His smile turned mischievous. "Then we have time," as he pulled me closer, as our bodies melded in the familiar dance we'd perfected over these months. I marveled at the strange path that had led me here, a robbery, a calm reaction, amber eyes noticing what others missed. Life was still complicated. Luca's world still had shadows I was only beginning to understand. The future held no guarantees. But in his arms, I found something I'd never expected that day at Salvatore's when 3 masked men burst through the door. Not just protection or passion, but partnership, understanding, home. Whatever came next, we would face it together. Calm amid the chaos, strength in vulnerability, love despite, or perhaps because of, all the danger.